I think it's really, I just got to the point of thinking how do you actually make sense? I mean, I was thinking about things that people around this table had told me, and Charlotte, for example, Steve with his his avant-garde work, Michael working with a percussionist who he thought maybe should have rights, but that wasn't the deal. Jenny trying to distribute rights amongst her co-workers, and none of this really seemed to work in relation. It didn't seem to work in terms of economic motivations, pure and simple. I think where we've got to, and I think this is really an interesting place, is that the vast majority of creative work is cross-subsidized by other kinds of activity. Whether it's teaching or whether it's bar work or whether it's temping. It could be any number of things, or whether it's having a partner who earns more money. So you're in a very strange kind of economy, and therefore the expectations of the ways in which people deal with each other are not actually shaped by clear economic expectations. And one of the questions we posed at the meeting you were at, Helen, was, at what point would money become significant for the way in which people deal with each other? And nobody knew. And so you start. How on earth does this relate to the rhetorics of government about incentivizing people to produce? Building company capabilities and all of that, when the vast majority of people perhaps working in creative sectors are simply not thinking along those kinds of lines. Now, the gift relationship, it's an imperfect model, but as you'll know yourself, given your sociological background, that there are good accounts of how gift relationships work, and one of the characteristic features of it is you give something now, what comes back to you may be very indefinitely deferred, and actually it may not even come back to you, but there is a kind of an expectation that you're within a circle of relationships within which people's activities will be mutually sustaining over some kind of period. And something along those lines seems to be much closer to a lot of creative practice than the idea that if you hold out a clear financial incentive, this is going to motivate people, or if you subsidize a particular piece of work, this may have an occasional effect, but it doesn't necessarily lead to sustainability. So one of the interesting areas of sustainability is cooperation, actually, out with either subsidy or pure market relations. So I think that's where we think. Actually, I should shut up because it's past and we've got to keep to time. Does that kind of clarify it?
Yeah. It does. Let's just throw it open for any comment before we move on. We've just got maybe a minute. Would anybody like to throw any thoughts onto the table?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm an interloper into the symposium really, so I don't know what previous discussions have taken place, but as someone who works with young emerging artists a lot, the rhetoric, which is a non-policy rhetoric that seems to be spoken, is an ethical practice. It's a practice of ethics, and I'm wondering where ethics sits in relation to a more directed notion of copyright. So what these practitioners are trying to do is learn to work ethically with each other, and that means in fairness. That means with equality. As you say, none of them assume they're going to be rich, so I guess issues of distribution of wealth don't come up, but the practice itself proposes to have an integrity of ethics at its centre of process making, I guess. So I just think ethics might be an interesting word, and you may already have discussed that in your...
Yeah, we've touched on it, but it is an interesting word.
It's a really, really interesting idea, because the copyright framework, as far as sort of collaboration and sort of attribution of authorship and ownership, doesn't take ethics into account at all. so it's a really interesting way of thinking about it, actually. Yeah.
One of the emerging areas of work, at least in the kind of socio-cultural analysis side, is what's called the moral economy of creativity, which actually fits very closely to these.
Interesting. That's interesting. Thanks.
Can I ask a general question as well? I just wondered whether, on balance, you felt that there, having done the research, that there is a problem with the copyright regime in terms of its adequacy in helping to help performers exploit their rights in performance, or do you feel it doesn't need? Is there a problem to be fixed, really? Or do you feel that going into that area could start to maybe impede in terms of experimentation? Or is what you're saying that you've discovered all this to be irrelevant, really, to the everyday concerns?
Yes, I think it's very interesting. I think largely the latter, in that a lot of our interviewees know it's there, but what they really try to do is to order their own relationships, as Philip has said, sort of underneath the wire, and it's only going to be when money becomes relevant and they don't know how much that sort of suddenly you're going to you're going to look at rights. I mean, there are things that could be done with the copyright framework. I mean, I would love the idea of sort of the whole thing being looked at under sort of an ethical lens, if you like, to see sort of how that might shape things. There are things that can be done because certainly the UK framework is very fixed on individual authorship. Even sort of getting joint authorship can be complicated. So you could look at sort of ideas of collective authorship, which might sort of help more. In terms of performance rights, of course, sort of we did go into there because there are these beyond copyright elements that we were looking at. But of course, copyright has been there for so long. Performers' rights are, sort of much newer. So in terms of exploitation of rights, performers come right down the bottom of the list as compared to those who hold copyright. So in that, sort of in that context, sort of they would be better off having copyright than they would performers' rights, unless we can pull the industry apart and get everybody to renegotiate how much goes to who when things are exploited.
Yeah, I think I just want to say that I don't know exactly what Dee will be talking about later on, but I think that she and I will, somewhere between us, address some of the things that actually probably needs to be fixed. And I think it has a lot to do with this idea of incentive. Copyright being designed to create the incentive to generate texts, but there is no incentive to generate, from a copyright or performance right perspective, these amorphous, collaborative, improvised works, and hence no way to exploit them financially or legally either.
I think, well, I'd just say a couple of things at this point, and following on from that. I mean, from my perspective, by and large, the argument about economic incentivization is garbage, I think. And I can say a little bit more about that later on. But also, the thing that struck me about the initial presentation was the idea that the concept of the work was unproblematic. And I presume largely what you're talking about there is the category of protected subject matter. Yes. In terms of what's protected, of course, the concept of the work is incredibly problematic as to how and where you draw the lines. And actually, I mean, for me, we should be thinking about creating space within the copyright regime to encourage and allow for creative endeavour, whether it's non-commercial and so on and so forth, and narrowing the concept of the protected work is a really powerful way of doing that. I mean, it's got ridiculous, I mean, as you know, in terms of info-packing and what have you. So those are the two things I'd throw on the table. Incentivization is garbage. The work is very problematic.
Good moment to shift to the next session, I think.
Yes. So, thank you for those comments. They were sort of incredibly helpful and really very interesting.